right, hello everybody. We're going to I want to talk to you today about doing research, and we're going to talk about just different types of sources and finding sources. Okay, in our next assignment, for our next group of assignments, I'll actually show you how to find the online resources from the library. Okay, so we just want to talk about kinds of resources or sources, and so we're going to start with primary sources. Of course, the word primary means first. It's our first source. All right, so examples of this would be like historical documents. So if I'm actually quoting or referencing the um, the Constitution, then that's going to be a historical document. That's a primary source. But if I'm looking at someone's interpretation, that's something different. So any kind of historical documents are going to fall under primary sources. Literary works, so especially, so these are going to be works that are written, like works of fiction or nonfiction, and that I'm referencing, and they're not talking about something else necessarily. Like, so if I'm using Pride and Prejudice and writing a story or an essay on Pride and Prejudice, my literary work, the book Pride and Prejudice, would be my primary source. Eyewitness accounts, of course, we get these. Some of you guys might be in criminal justice. That's going to happen a lot. Eyewitness accounts and other historical accounts where someone, maybe the fire in Chicago years ago. There were a lot of eyewitness accounts of people and their experiences in it, and that becomes a primary source as well. Field reports. I'm not as familiar with field reports. I haven't used them myself, but that's also would be a primary source. Diaries. Watch where you keep your diary, because one day it might become a primary source. Just ask Anne Frank. At some point, her diary was published for the world to see. Her father published her diary after she had passed and after everything was over and they were out of the attic. And so, that's, something that is a primary source. It's like this person, if I want to write about a person and I want to do a biography of them, then a diary is a great primary source to get an idea of their experiences and their thoughts. Letters, I've seen this a lot. A lot of people, especially historical people, they've kept their letters. Some they may have burned and we don't know about, but a lot of letters have been kept and published as well. And so you can find letters. There's lots of letters between famous people. I actually have an entire large book of nothing but letters from historical people like Martin Luther King and Benjamin Franklin and just all these people going back and forth. And so it's something you can use. Again, it's a primary source. Lab studies, I haven't used these myself. I know so much because I'm not a science person, but that's going to be, again, a primary source, and it's going to be more reliable. And then original research. Actually, at some point when we get to our argumentative paper, you guys will be able to do your own survey. That'll be a choice, and so that would be your primary source. So like if you create a survey and you survey enough people, and you've done a good job of it, it becomes something reliable and a reliable primary source that you've created yourself. Secondary sources, okay, so primary first, secondary, of course. Scholarly books and articles. So these, I use these a lot as an English major myself because, writing, if I was writing about Hamlet, Hamlet would be my primary source, but I had to do research, additional research for longer research papers. And so I would have scholarly books or articles that I would find where someone else had written about, someone who, with more of an education than I had, with lots of letters after their name, have, written about Hamlet themselves. And so I can take their words also and use it to back up my ideas, right? Reviews, a lot of reviews you see, mostly reviews of books and movies and things like that. Those are secondary sources where the movie might be the first source and the review is going to be second. Biographies, again, this is not written by the person. This is not an autobiography, but biographies. And these again are secondary sources. This person has read the person's letters and their diaries, and they're gotten feedback from other sources, and so it's not exactly, it's definitely not a primary source, even though they've used primary sources hopefully to write the biography. Textbooks, so all your textbooks are going to be secondary. They've gotten the information from somewhere else. Basically, a secondary source is any other work that interprets or discusses a primary source. Okay. So we have our kinds of sources. Again, I mentioned before scholarly sources. These are going to be more academic experts, written by people who have made it their life to study other things and write about them. And they're more reliable. You're going to notice them. There's certain things like, oh, this is a scholarly source, and we'll talk about that. Popular sources include any other online or print publications. Although we can find scholarly sources online, but other websites. Now, for our informative paper, our report, we're not going to be using popular sources. Although when it comes to argumentative paper, and I have a complete other lesson on finding those sources, finding good sources that are popular, like online and magazines and things like that. Then we'll be able to use those. But for now, we're going to just stick to our sources that we can find in the library database, which are definitely reliable and scholarly. Of course, in most college courses, you're expected to stick to scholarly sources. Because what happens with the popular sources, there's maybe too much bias that you might find. There may be people who are not really reliable sources that are publishing things out there. And so you have to watch and say, okay, be able to distinguish between them. Okay, so just because it's on the internet does not mean it's reliable. So identifying scholarly sources, what are you looking for? Of course, there should be an author. It's not always a human author. Sometimes it's a corporate author, but you have to be, again, careful to see who that corporate author is, because again, they may have a bias. What they're publishing may be for their own benefit, and then you can't quite take that completely as is. Many times there's multiple authors in a work, and especially when you get to things that are more scientific, where there's a long list of all these people who contributed to it. A peer review, of course, meaning like if it came from something, then peer reviews means like people, their peers, other scholars have looked at it. They're being evaluated. That there's someone looking and making sure what they're putting in there is accurate and fair. They should have source citations. This is of course with Wikipedia. Sometimes you will see they have citations. Obviously we say don't use Wikipedia because it is a wiki. Which means anyone can contribute to it. Sometimes they do use their sources though, and if supposedly you can see their sources, also you might want to see, are their sources reliable? That may not always be the case. Like, are they getting that information from a blog somewhere? There should be a publisher if it's reliable and scholarly. The language and content. So, of course, everything has language, but what does the language sound like? Does it sound academic? Is the content academic? It shouldn't sound like a rant or raving. At that point, you've probably found a blog. Even if the person does say they have a PhD, which is questionable. And there's other clues. Some things you might see, like there's little to no advertising if you're using an online resource, because they're not doing it necessarily. It's not out there for profit. And few to no illustrations. If you do see illustrations are going to be more driven. There's a purpose behind the illustrations if it's scholarly. So there are there's graphs and there's statistics and there's tables and all this stuff, and it's like if there is an actual illustration, there's a point to it, that it's maybe referenced within, like maybe they're writing about the art, and so they're referencing that work of art. Print and online resources, of course. Reference works, these are important. Now, growing up myself, pretty much every classroom in elementary school had the set of encyclopedias in the back of the class. Usually they were only used when your teacher wanted to punish you and had you copy out of the dictionary or the encyclopedia. The thing is, with the paper encyclopedias, things can change very quickly. And although they may publish a different encyclopedia, a different edition every year, not everybody is buying a new edition of all the encyclopedias every year. And so the changes are going to happen too often. Now, now for something, a lot of encyclopedias, like for example, the big one that I used growing up was Encyclopedia Britannica. They have an actual website, so I would trust Encyclopedia Britannica's website more than I would trust their published work, because their published work, like the paper copy, is not necessarily as accurate as their online copy, because it's very easy to update online copy than it is than a whole print copy, especially when it comes to encyclopedia. It's a large work. Bibliographies are ones you see. In the library catalog, we're going to be using this, of course, indexes and databases. We're going to stick with the databases more than anything, especially right now that the library is closed. And so we're going to be doing everything online, but I'm going to show you guys how to get that, okay? And then the search sites and subject directories. When I say search sites, you're not going to put google.com as your reference. I shouldn't see that in an in-text citation or in your works cited. I have seen it in the past, not so much at college level, although it has happened occasionally where I'll say, you know, in the in-text citation it says Google. Well, unless you're writing about Google and you're on their about page and you're doing the history of Google and you're getting information from their site about that, that's the only reason that I should see Google. Your search engine is not your resource. It helps you find other resources. And actually Google has specifically a scholarly search bar. So you can actually, where you can do just scholarly searches, and it will only search like peer-reviewed magazines and things like that. Okay. All right, so go ahead, and there's going to be a 5-question quiz on this. Please make sure you answer in complete sentences, and we'll move on next to our next assignment.